Hello, welcome to our discussion today about the gig economy and how to regulate it, how labor looks like in the gig economy, which problems appear, which approaches exist to improve working conditions, employment conditions in the sector. We have three guests today. I will introduce them in a moment in more detail, or no, I will introduce them just now, even though they are sitting here. Maybe you just come also the front. So we have Stephen Hill here. Stephen, welcome. Stephen is the journalist, activist, author, from California, currently visiting the WZB as journalist in residence. He will start our event with a short talk about, let's say, about what labor in the gig economy means and how it can be turned to something which at least resembles a little bit decent work. We have here Sabine Pfeiffer, professor of sociology from Nürnberg-Erlangen, who has written extensively on all issues related to digital work, technology and work, skills and work. And I'm very glad you're here, Sabine. Maybe you also just come over to the front, because I think Stephen will not have slides for his initial talk, so we can just take our seats here. And we have Six Silberman here from the IG Metall. Six, I'm glad he arrived on time. In fact, just 10 minutes ago from Frankfurt. Six was one of the creators of the Turkopticon, or the creator, maybe you can later talk more about this, of Turkopticon, a platform meant to support platform workers in organizing, getting in contact, fighting for an improvement of working conditions, and who is now ventured a huge jump over the ocean and is working in Frankfurt for the IG Metall. I imagine it was a cultural shock to arrive here, but maybe the struggles you organize here at least resemble a little bit what you also experienced in California. So welcome, Six. And I will be moderating the discussion. Just one question, information. You would like just to record the discussion. I hope it is okay with everybody. I think we will not touch on any personal secrets, and who knows, and if, we will cut it out. So it will work as follows. So Stephen will start the discussion with around 10 to 15 minutes at maximum input about labor in the gig economy, and then we go directly into discussing it. And I will also take care that we turn very quickly into a discussion which involves everybody, so that we can also have questions, comments from the audience. Okay, Stephen, so the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Are any of these microphones working? Great. And can someone track? So let me know when 10 minutes are up, and then I'll start wrapping up. Well, great. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. I have been here for a couple of months now. I'm a journalist in residence here at the WZB, and it's been really a blast for me to be interacting with people like Martin and others who is just trying to think through these important issues about where are we going in the 21st century, how are we all going to work, will there be jobs left, are we all going to be taken over by the robots, is our data all going to be stripped away from us, all these questions that we're, in the United States you see lots of headlines about this, but there's not a whole lot of thoughtful discussion about what do we do. It's just everybody getting panicky when you see Mark Zuckerberg, basically stonewalling in front of, and the members of Congress are clueless. When you look at the questions that most of them are asking him, and you realize, my God, these are the people that are supposed to figure out the regulations and how to rein in some of the abuses of Facebook. And then, so you have the United States on the one hand, and then you have China and its black box on the other hand, and you think, are these the two models for development for the future? Or can Europe create a third way? I think in many ways, that's what excites me, is that there are a lot of interesting things going on here in Germany and in Europe, really trying to think through these issues. So I'm just going to outline a little bit of how I see the future of work and platform economies and companies, and you know, how this is likely to play out and what we can do about it. You know, a lot of what we're experiencing is a coming together of three pretty amazing technologies: our smartphones, right here, high-speed internet, and big data, or what they call the cloud. These three technologies are converging and creating all sorts of possibilities, potential, and problems. And so one of the things that is going to be changing quite dramatically is how we work. And you know, for a lot of people, they're already gaining access through a whole different type of relationship with their employer, with their company. And of course, a lot of this began in 2008, 2009 with an economic collapse. And a lot of jobs went away. You know, especially in the United States, here in Germany as well, to some degree, though not as much. A lot of the jobs that were lost were the good jobs, the higher paying jobs, jobs that had permanency, that had some sort of safety net, health care, all these sorts of things. And they were replaced by part-time, temporary, self-employed, here in Germany, solo self-employed jobs. And so along into that context comes the sharing economy, gig economy, platform companies, whatever you want to call it. And they start saying like, oh, you can be the CEO of your own driving business. You can be the CEO of your own little hotel run out of your home. You can be the CEO of you know, your own house cleaning business, carpentry business, computer programming business. It basically created a lot of opportunities for independent contractors, people who were making you know, their living from one job to another. And so, you know, we have to acknowledge that for a lot of people, they like the flexibility of these jobs. If you're, you know, what we call a labor market outsider, you know, for a lot of, in a lot of countries, that means if you were a woman, minorities, immigrants, young people, these are the typical labor market outsiders. It created another avenue for work. I was in Croatia not that long ago, and talking to some of the younger people there, and they were saying like, yeah, I'm getting some jobs on Upwork, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. One of the countries with the most people getting jobs, freelance jobs on Upwork, are from Romania. And they're getting jobs from companies right here in Germany who are hiring them. You know, it used to be, to outsource, you had to move your company or your plant. And that was a barrier to doing that. It was a lot expensive to set up a whole new company or plant somewhere else. Now you don't have to do that anymore. You can just outsource by going online. So this is creating what I and others have called the freelance society. The idea that more and more people are working freelance. Now some of them might have a regularly employed part-time job, and they supplement that with a temporary job, and then maybe some freelance work, driving a shift for Uber. So in many ways, the labor force has become extremely more complex because you don't have just so many people working for that single employer for many, many years anymore. Some of them are stitching their financial lives together on a spectrum of work. And a lot of the laws, like the safety net that we have for workers, was constructed for another time period. You know, so you know, it was constructed for a type of worker who worked for that one employer for many years. Well, now you have workers who are working for multiple employers, sometimes simultaneously. So we need to make the safety net, the welfare system needs to become more portable for these sorts of workers. And I'll talk about that a little bit if I have time. Because it's doable. You know, in a lot of ways, what we're trying to do is update how we work for the 21st century. Now, but there's some problems with these companies. First of all, you know, a lot of them come out of Silicon Valley. Now there's some here in Germany, others in Europe that are these platform type of companies. And when you look at these companies, in some ways they are redesigning how corporations work. So if you think about corporations in the post-World War II era, the auto companies are the classic example, these big vertical companies where everything was done under the single roof. Production, manufacturing, design, exporting, marketing, everything was done under the big vertical roof of the big company. And then along about the 1970s, 1980s came a new type of corporation that was typified by companies like Apple and Nike. What they did was they took the production and they outsourced it to low-wage countries, but they kept things like design, marketing still under the roof. Now along comes a whole new type of corporation, and these companies are really, they have a small core of employees, and they use technology to oversee an army of freelancers to create this, what we call a distributed workforce. And this presents a lot of challenges. So a company like Upwork, it's based in Silicon Valley. They have about 250 regular employees that work for Upwork. They claim, and I say claim because with these companies, you really have to take their data with a big grain of salt. They tell you what they want you to know. So they claim, and no one has been able to say that they're wrong, but they claim they have about 10 million freelancers around the world. So 250 core employees, regular employees, are overseeing 10 million freelancers who plug into this ecosystem. And the thing about it is you can see on there a whole bunch of occupations. There's the usual sort of Silicon Valley-esque type of occupations, computer programmers, software designers, all those sorts of things. But you also can see graphic designers, illustrators, translators. You can see architects, lawyers, basically any job that someone can do where they don't have to be next to the team, any team doing it. They can upload the finished product on Dropbox or email it, or there's a million ways to get that finished product to the person that's paying them. And so it's not just one occupation. A lot of times when we talk about freelancers, and we talk about sort of the computer type, and they actually make a fairly decent salary in many cases. But there's a whole bunch of other freelancers out there working on these platforms, TaskRabbit and others, that are making not very much money at all. And so with Upwork, you have all these occupations and industries, and you can go online and you can see, okay, here's a worker from Germany saying, I'd like to make 60 euros an hour for this job. Someone from the US saying, I'd like to make $70 an hour for this job. And there's someone from Thailand, India, Philippines saying, I'll take 2 euros an hour for that job. And they have, they're highly trained. They have access to technology. They can finish the job and upload it, no problem. So if you're someone hiring at this, for this job, I mean, why would you pay 60 euros when you can pay 2? The math is pretty simple. And so and you can actually watch on Upwork, it's an online auction. It's a labor auction. You can watch the bids going lower and lower and lower. So this creates some real challenges for developed world workers compared to developing world workers. Now, for the developing world worker, they have access to work in a way they didn't have before. They can get work from anywhere in the world. Before, they would have been restricted, for the most part, to not only their country, but right in the little area where they live. For the developed world worker, they now are in competition with someone who is going to undercut them in terms of wages, and they do. Now, so in addition, these are freelancers, so they don't really have access to any kind of welfare net, safety net, Social Security. All you're getting is your salary. These workers who are hired, there's actually a lot of surveillance of these workers. So when you work for Upwork, they have a way of keeping track of your keystrokes, your mouse strokes. They even have now, you have to download a certain suite of software to work for them. And they can take a snapshot of your computer screen, in a sense looking over your shoulder to see what you're looking at, what you're working on. Now keep in mind, this is a freelancer who may be working for 5 or 6, 7 other businesses, and yet this one business is going to somehow claim they have exclusive rights to this person's time. So these create a lot of challenges. These companies, they don't really pay taxes. So if I'm living in San Francisco and I'm hiring you from Germany, You know, I can send you whatever, I can pay you for 10,000 euros for the work you've done for me, send you a check, and I'm not paying into your social security system. And the worker getting that check might be figuring, you know, the German government doesn't know that I even did this work. So they may not be paying taxes on it either. So this, and as more and more workers are working this way, this is going to create a challenge for our welfare systems. Will it undermine the funding that our welfare systems and the, you know, government funding for roads, for education, for defense, for security, all sorts of things, if this becomes bigger and bigger? And it is becoming bigger, we know that. So these are you know, a few of the issues that we're going to have to grapple with. I'm just touching a little bit of them. Now, and also, you know, there's a lot of discussion right now about the quantity of jobs. I mean, Germany now is doing well, so, you know, the number of jobs has picked up. In the United States, unemployment rate is actually quite low now. But there's not a lot of discussion about the quality of jobs and what's happening to the quality of jobs, because that's an important other side of the coin, right? So, you know, if the job is someone who's working part-time and, you know, they doesn't pay very well, then they have to supplement that with some temp work or maybe some solo self-employed work, bogus self-employment. We all know about that. You know, this is not exactly, we can't really, even though the numbers look good, the unemployment rate is low, we don't really have a number to help us measure the quality of jobs. I mean, it's nice to be able to say, oh, the unemployment rate is 4.5%, but what if the, you know, the quality of jobs rate was, you know, was getting worse? And yet we don't have any way to measure this. And in many ways, we don't have the means to measure what the economy is turning into. We're still using things like household surveys. In the United States, the way the household survey works is, you know, they interview workers by phone, sometimes face-to-face, and they ask you, okay, how are you working? Tell me about it. They tell you about the first job, and they ask you a lot of questions about that in detail. Well, then they ask you, do you have a second job? And the person says yes or no, and that's it. They don't ask anything more. They don't ask, do you have a third, fourth, fifth, sixth job? So, and this is a methodology that's been used for decades, so it's understandable why they aren't changing the methodologies that fast. You know, in order to have, to look at patterns, you want to be able to look at the same methodology across time. But the reality is, in many ways, the way we are measuring how people are working today is simply inadequate. It was not designed for the type of workforce that we are becoming. And you know, in talking to researchers here, they also use a lot of a similar household survey. And you know, I said to some of the German researchers, like, because they were, you know, they were so, what would be the word? So complacent. Like, we think, oh, these things are happening in the United States. They're not happening here. No, things are good here. And I said, well, how many German workers are working on Upwork? And they're like, I don't know. Have you ever heard of Upwork? No, I've never heard of that company. So, well, then how do you know that there aren't a lot of Germans working on Upwork and you don't even know about them? And so I was able to go online and using their filters and showing them that, and showed them that in the past week, about 22,000 German workers had earned income on Upwork. And this is just one platform. There's dozens of them. 7 months later, I asked this researcher again, so have you been tracking German workers on Upwork? No, I haven't had time. Well, in that 7 months, the amount of German workers had doubled on Upwork. So, you know, there are other studies out there, McKinsey and others, who have said that Germany, like other countries, is undercounting the number of what they call independent workers, workers who aren't, who are making a living through these different methods, not just gig economy, but also solo self-employed and other types of work, by 90% in the case of Germany. That's what the McKinsey study found. Now, are they right? Are they wrong? It seems like it's worth trying to figure that out. But the other part that we have to really look about is, I mentioned the quality of work. So if you're working in the gig economy, okay, it's really, you're always hustling. You're juggling. You may have one job today for 2 hours, another one tomorrow for 3 hours, and maybe another one a week from now, you know, for a couple of days. And so not only are you, you know, you're trying to do a good job, but you're always looking for the next job. You don't have any secure employment. It would be as if, I mean, I don't know the German football players. Who's a famous football player? Are there any German ones? Lionel Messi, can we use him? He's our... Who's that? Thomas Müller. Okay, so it would be as if
Or Gerd
Thomas
Müller for
only
the
got
others.
paid when he kicked a goal. He doesn't get paid for running up and down the field. He doesn't get paid for practicing. He doesn't get paid for training in the off season. He only gets paid when he kicks the goal. That's what gig economy work is like. You only get paid when you deliver that job. You don't get paid for training. You're responsible for that yourself. And companies that are using these sorts of workers don't seem to think it's their job to train these workers to make sure they're better. So there goes the de-skilling of your labor force. You're always, you hear all these stories where, because in the gig economy, they rate you 1 through 5. And so like TaskRabbit, you show up to do your task, and they say, and you do it, raking the leaves in someone's yard or something, and they say, look, as long as you're here, do you mind taking a look at my washing machine? You seem like you know what you're doing, and I can't get it to work. And like, well, I'm not getting paid to look at your washing machine. But if you don't do it, they might give you a poor rating. You hear this with Uber drivers a lot. Someone jumps in their car and says, I'm late to the airport, and if you don't break every law to get me to the airport on time, I'm going to give you a lousy rating. So you live in fear of these ratings. This is not exactly the way to help workers build up their skills and to feel confident in the workforce. So now for a lot of the workers so far, they're just doing this part-time. They're making extra money. They're supplementing another part-time job. So some people said, well, maybe in the end it's going to work out. But the reality is that we're starting to see other companies that are incorporating these sorts of jobs, these sorts of companies. So IKEA, right, bought TaskRabbit. Now they can hire all those rabbits to do all these odd jobs for them. And Walmart has been using TaskRabbit to deliver their things for Walmart because they can exploit the rabbits more than they can exploit their own workers. Amazon now is starting to create its own delivery service. And again, these are workers that just get paid by the job. They're not getting salary. They don't even know when the next job will be. This is a radical proposal to us about how we redesign work. And there's a lot of debate right now in the US and here in Germany too about how big is the gig, how many people are working this way. And the overall people say like, oh, it's not that big. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's bigger than you realize because these workers are hard to count. And maybe this is the wave of the future and more companies are going to be using these platforms to supplement and to create this distributed workforce and to get down to a small core of regular employees and then use technology to oversee an army of freelancers. That's the trend that we see in the labor markets. And those are the fastest growing types of jobs. So anyway, I'll wrap up by, so what do we do about this? Well, there's a lot of things we need to do, but one of the ideas that I put forward is, as I mentioned earlier, was what I call a portable safety net. So with a portable safety net, every worker would have assigned to her or him what I call an individual security account. So that account would follow that worker from job to job. And every business who hires that worker, regardless of whether that worker is permanently employed, part-time, temporary, solo self-employed, it wouldn't matter. Every business that hires that worker would pay a certain amount into that account prorated to the number of hours that worker works for you. So if a worker worked for you 10 hours a week, you would put in, approximately about a quarter of the amount you would put in for a full-time worker. And this would allow this worker now to go from job to job and to feel like they're not abandoning any kind of Social Security. And actually, in many ways, would liberate the workforce to, a lot of workers get stuck in a job they don't really like because they have children, so they have good health care, they have retirement, so they feel like they can't leave that job. Well, by having something like this, they could feel freer to leave that job. And so in many ways, a lot of us are searching for ways to empower workers. This portable safety net idea would empower workers, would give them more leverage in the labor markets because they're not stuck in a job anymore. They'd have another choice. So the other thing it would do is it would, right now, as a worker, especially in the United States, I mean, it's not quite as bad in Germany, but there are a lot of workers, and I've talked to them and interviewed them for my book here, Die Startup Illusion. You're stuck. You can have flexibility in your work, or you can have security, but you can't have both. Well, with this portable safety net, you could have both, at least to some degree. So the idea is we have to make it possible for workers to have both, not just one or the other, pitting these two great values against each other. And from the business's point of view, they'll say, well, it's going to increase my costs and all these sorts of things, because if you're a business and you're hiring a contractor, a freelancer, instead of a regularly employed person, you're saving anywhere from 25 to 30% on your labor costs. So, this is their incentive. That's why they don't want to do this. That's why they don't just extend benefits to freelancers. Well, but if every business is covered by the same law, then it means no one's hurt more than anyone else. So there's really no complaint there. It's not going to ruin the competitiveness vis-a-vis any of your other competitors, because they're all going to have to do it too. In some ways, what this would be, you have a great system here. I can't, KSK, Künstler Sozialkasse? Can anyone recognize what I said? Oh my gosh. I always get a lot of laughs when I say that. KSK. KSK für alle, for everyone. That's what this system is basically would be entailing. And I think this is the type of foundation to give the labor force of the 21st century, whether it's in the United States, Germany, wherever. This is the type of thing. This is something that we should be doing at the European level. Just like you have co-determination. It's an amazing institution. When I tell Americans that Germans get to elect 50% of the members of the boards of directors of Fortune 500 companies, they can't believe it. So you guys already do outrageous things, and it works. So it seems to me that this is the next step for Germany, having these kind of portable safety nets so that workers can go from job to job and feel empowered wherever they are. Thank you for your time. And I look forward to discussion with my colleagues here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen, also for being nearly on time within the 15 minutes, nearly. And so let's just comment on your proposition about this portable safety net. I know, Six, maybe you could comment on it from the trade union perspective. So first, how do you see this, the prospects and the let's say the impact of such a proposition on the world of work, on the work of freelancers on those platforms? And second, would you, from a trade union perspective, say this is the most important step? Would you suggest there are other issues how to regulate labor on platforms?
So I'm an American. I've been here for 3 years, and I'm a programmer. So I'm the last person you want to ask about Germany's social safety net system. It's extremely complicated. I'm not even going to venture, especially because I know we're recording, I'm not going to venture an official trade union position on that question. I know that the Große Koalition has written in their Koalitionsvertrag that the minimum contributions for solo self-employed persons to the health insurance should be reduced, and that this was a Forderung, a proposal of the trade union, and I think that we're very pleased with that. There are some other propositions that have been included with that, and like I said, I'm not going to venture to be the expert on the social security system, but I think progress is being made. I think it's slow, and I think that's all I can safely say about the question of social safety net. And I think that you pointed this out, Stephen, several times. It's going to look different in every country, and changes are going to be made. I can answer questions about what does it mean to be a platform worker, but I think maybe we'll do another round.
But still, you are discussing principles of what could be a fair platform work, how you could create conditions of fair work in the gig economy. And so if we go, let's say, if you could comment on this, so what would be core principles how to make this work more fair?
So I think if we begin a discussion from the starting point of okay, we accept that these platforms exist. We accept that workers are using them. Whether you want to use the word choosing to use them or not, they're using them. And if we take the approach that we want to improve working conditions for the people that are doing this work, our approach is not to say that these platforms shouldn't exist or that all of these workers are falsely self-employed. Some of them are certainly falsely self-employed. I would say my personal position is that Uber drivers are almost all falsely self-employed. And in some countries, they're going to get away with that, and in some countries, they're not going to get away with that. I would say that Upwork freelancers are not falsely self-employed to the best of my understanding, but they do have to agree to, I would say, fairly one-sided terms and conditions before they can begin working on the platform. And in general, many of the terms and conditions on these online labor platforms are shaped to the benefit of the clients and the platform operator to the detriment, in many cases, of the worker. And this imbalance in power and economic benefit doesn't affect every worker all the time necessarily, but sometimes a worker will, for example, submit work. Client will say, I'm not going to pay for the work. The worker will send an email to the platform operator saying, why didn't I get paid for my work? No answer. On many of the platforms, the client has a right to refuse payment, and the worker doesn't have a right to receive an explanation or to receive a human review of the non-payment. The same applies for account deactivation. The same applies for, let's say you take some sort of qualification test so that your profile will appear in the results for a client searching for workers who are qualified to do some particular task. You take a qualification test, it's administered algorithmically, there's no human overseeing your result. You get a message later saying you didn't reach the qualification, you didn't receive the qualification, and the soonest you can try again is in 18 months. There's no button that you can click, there's no box that you can type a message into that says, I think the qualification result was unfair, and actually I have a master's degree in this thing, and your test is messed up. There's no human that's going to look at that. There's no way for you to get a human to look at that, and you have no right as a self-employed worker who has agreed to the terms and conditions set forth by the platform to complain in any way about this, legally speaking. So the angle that we're trying to work on from the trade union perspective is we're working with German platforms to try and improve their processes and to try to improve their terms and conditions, and some of them have in fact done so. And what we're doing at the policy level is trying to work with regulators and the people who are involved with the regulator, who are in dialogue with the regulators. It looks like this year there's going to be a European guideline on platform-based work. As far as I know, there's not yet substantive content in the proposal for that guideline about regulating terms and conditions, but I'm hoping that that's going to be something that we'll manage to get in there, because I think that there could definitely be a European guideline saying workers have certain rights and platform operators are not allowed to deprive workers of these rights in the terms and conditions of the platform. And I think that would be a good step.
Mm-hmm. And you emphasized now very much the payment conditions, let's say the basic right also to get answers to grievances.
Yeah.
Are there any, let's say, trade union ideas, concepts, how to institutionalize this kind of let's say, voice? So would you rather think about independent, let's say, platforms in the way of Turkopticon, or are there any suggestions how to build in this kind of labor voice in the existing platforms?
Yes. So I guess I'll separate two things. One is the issue of sort of individual workers having grievances and being able to air those grievances through some sort of institutionally supported mechanism to the platform operators. And we actually have a working example of that. So in Germany, there's 8 platforms that have signed a voluntary initiative that they call the Crowdsourcing Code of Conduct. It's not as concrete as it could be. We've had some input into the further development of that. It's now in its 2nd version. I expect in the next couple years there'll be a further evolution. But one of the features of that is that the platforms have entered into what I call in English an ombuds office. So there's a 5-party body that's composed of one crowd worker, one trade union representative, one employee of a platform, one representative of the crowdsourcing association. So it's not formally exactly like an employer association like more established ones, but it's a sort of association of platform operators. And there's a neutral chair. And there's a forum on the internet. If you're a worker on a platform that has signed the crowdsourcing code of conduct and you feel that your rights have been disrespected in some way, you can fill out the form. We get an email saying, hey, somebody's filled out the form, here's what they said. And then we have a process where I'm technically not on the committee, my colleague is on the committee. We sort of convene a meeting of the 5 members of the committee. Solutions are reached by consensus. Any questions that need to be clarified with the platform operator or the client or the worker are clarified. And basically, usually what happens is there was a technical problem and the worker gets their money, for example, or whatever, the worker accidentally created 2 accounts and the platform operator blocked both of their accounts. And then the platform operator says, yeah, well, we have a thing in our terms and conditions saying you can't have 2 accounts. And if you do, then we're going to block all of your accounts. They say, oh, it was an accident, delete this one, and this is the one I want to keep working with. So sometimes it's just miscommunication, but the scale of the platforms where you have hundreds of thousands of workers and you have a really small group of employees operating the thing leads to miscommunications or user interface problems, creating deprivations of worker rights. So that's the sort of individual level grievance, thank you. And then there's the question of institutionalizing worker voice in something that would look familiar to somebody who knows about co-determination or works councils in Germany or Scandinavia. The answer is we're working on that. It's extremely difficult because the workers are not physically co-present to each other. You can't stand outside the factory door and say, hey, everyone join the union. The first thing that happens when you contact somebody from the union who's working on a platform is they say, haben Sie hier etwas verloren? Have you lost something? Are you looking for your keys that you, like, what are you doing here? Like, we know IG Metall is about, strike vests and red flags and factories, and this isn't that, and what are you doing? So we have to explain ourselves. And then when you say, we're interested in setting up working groups of workers who meet with the platform operators and tell them about their experiences and offer suggestions about how things could be improved, right? Something like a works council takes a lot of explaining. The platform operators that have signed the crowdsourcing code of conduct, 3 of them, we've had workshops with workers in person, and they've actually said to us that this is something that we've wanted to do for a long time. But we haven't managed to do it because it's not a high priority for them. And they've been really grateful that we've organized that, and they like talking with their workers. Of course, this is not necessarily generalizable. Would Jeff Bezos say the same thing if, at Amazon, would Uber management say this? Would you have the same experience with these really huge American platforms? Hard to say. But I think, the short answer is co-determination, structures that would look familiar to somebody who's familiar with co-determination and works councils in Germany are possible on online labor markets, on online labor platforms. We're working with the NICE platform operators to prototype, and it's working. It's slow work. I can't tell you it's totally happened and, we've had this great conference, but maybe in 2 years we'll be able to show you pictures from the Crowd Worker Conference where you had platform operators and workers talking together about how to improve things for everyone. I definitely think that's going to happen within the next 2 or 3 years.
Maybe one issue, Stephen, you emphasized in your talk that platform economy is undermining traditional sectors, traditional employment relations, that it is, let's say, creating a completely new labor market structure. No, Sabine, you worked a lot on the importance of skills, of experience, also of subjective, let's say, subjective experience, communication on the shop floor. Would you share the estimation that this kind of platform-based work is really undermining traditional industries, is creating a completely new labor market structure?
Yes and no. On one hand, of course, if you have companies like Uber who are going into different markets, just ignoring regulations that are there. It's kind of their business model, as we all know. They just ignore what's going on there. They just try out how long it works. This is one, they are just scruple, without any scruple comparing to that. And they have so much venture capital, they are so much back that they somehow they really undermine the normal logic of markets, because what they don't have to do, but other companies have to do, is they don't have to produce black numbers for the next 10 years or something. And I think that's both things combined, going into different markets and just not try to understand how the regulations are here and how can I, as a company who comes into the market, act there, but just ignoring it. And the other thing is that the big accumulation of venture capital that we see there, and those both things combined really undermine normal kinds of historically developed forms of markets. On the other hand, this won't work with everything. Of course, Uber can do it because we have a lot of people on this world that are able to drive a car. But it doesn't work in the same way for really not only qualified things. Of course, we have all those platform examples with high qualified people doing things in medical research and whatever. But their kind of work only will work on that kind of platforms if you can cut it out somehow, or if it's just a generation of an idea. Where you compete to other ideas, but there's a difference between having an idea and getting it into making really the innovation work into products, into things. So this is something you can't do on your own, and not all of those things can be cut into unbelievable small pieces. So there are limits. One PhD thesis on my chair made research with IBM, where we have this big example, a big company going into the liquid kind of organization. Some years ago, they had this big plan to, I think it was 5,000 developers, that means high qualified people, let them into the crowd, and it stopped. They tried it out for around 2 years, and it's dead. The whole thing is dead now, because a lot of kind of projects need cooperation. This cooperation can be, and it is, of course, especially with IBM, for years, it's globally and it's virtual. A lot of those project things are virtual, but they still need a lot of kind of coordination, which evidently IBM thought this is something you could manage on the technical level, or you don't have to manage at all. And now they experience they have to do a lot of management, and this management is kind of a combination of, you have to know what's going on there on the real thing, what has to be coded, for example, and for what purpose, and all those things. It's not only management like Uber management of driving cars and looking into your numbers and seeing on what kind of hour of the day, in which kind of the city we need more drivers. So it's not just only business analytics, it's a management that still has to be a little bit more down to earth and understand what's going on really on the level of work. So I think there's not a chance to get every kind of work into this kind of employment. But still, I think if the more you have a labor market that is already polarized. I mean, in Germany, mostly we talk about platform economy as something that's coming in, and the effect of it is a more polarized labor market. I would say you have to flip the sides, because one explanation why platform economy or crowd work, microtasking, all that stuff, you are right, of course, Stephen, we don't know exactly what kind of numbers we have really. It's hard to get to that, but what we still know is that in Germany it's much more, not much more, it's much less than in other labor markets, and still this has a little bit to do that how our labor market looks, and it's not that polarized. We have developments in the last years. Of course, we have more precarious work. We have even people who are in the middle of qualification and the labor market structure have less in their pockets than 10 years ago. So even people who are in a normal employment are more in the situation to maybe have another job, a second or something. We have all this in Germany too, but not in that kind of development like we see it in UK or in the US. That means we have to, I think we have not to think so much only about how could we regulate new forms of not employment, but also how can we keep a labor market structure that is strong in the middle. As long as you have that, there are less people who have to choose, like you said. Any kind of labor could be in the platform economy or everything anywhere else. I mean, we have a lot of very, very low qualified and bad paid and under awfully conditioned work in a lot of sectors. It's not an invention of the platform economy. So I say we should think about, especially in Germany, where we have the strong middle in the labor market structure still. Is there any chance to keep that, to save that? I mean, this will change, the skills change, and the professions we have, the occupations we have will change, of course, due to a lot of reasons, but there's no kind of law of nature that we have to go into a polarized labor market. But the discussion we have always combined with platform economy or any other kind of digital labor, a lot of people also in the politician area think that's something that has to come. We are going into a world with a polarized labor market, and we should ask, why is that? Who is going to say that this is an unstoppable development? So I think we have to talk a lot of regulation, but not only what happens to those people who are in this kind of new work, but how can we secure this kind of middle that we still have, of course, although we see a lot of erosion there already.
I would just, in a minute, open the debate to the audience, but just a question to all of you. So let's say even if we dispute, so how big are the dangers of undermining traditional labor market structures by the new business models coming from the platform economy? I wonder how we could, let's say, even get hold of the companies who are often, let's say, global players, how to get hold of them in order to get the information about how many workers, for which pay, or to establish certain labor voice structures. So I don't know, maybe two or three of you, and then I open the discussion to the audience. How can we get hold of the companies, or is it there no problem of getting hold of them?
No, there is. They won't, I mean, because getting hold of them, I mean, sure, they'll sit down and talk with you, but what you need from them is the data. And that's what they won't give you.
This is Europe. Pass a law.
You can try that. But, you know, I mean, look, the European Commission fined Google 2.4 billion euros, and Google has sort of agreed to pay it, but they could have said to the Commission, look, we'll set up our servers on an island in international waters off the coast of Germany, and there's nothing you can do to stop us from beaming into Germans. I mean, these platform companies are different. I mean, you know, if you think about, you know, Ford Motor Company, if they want to set up a plant here in Germany, they have to get a lot of permits and licenses and all sorts of things in order to operate. And if they violate the terms of those permits and licenses, they can be fined, and in an extreme example, they can be shut down. I mean, look what's happened with Volkswagen. You have 2 Volkswagen executives in jail in the United States right now because they broke some laws. You really can't do that with these platform companies. They sort of exist everywhere and nowhere. And it's really hard to, I mean, there are things we can do, and you know, but we're not doing them now. And we have this idea of the open internet, and so we had this dream that information could flow freely on the internet. Well, now we see what Facebook has become. We see what, you know, search engines have become, where they manipulate results and steer you to search results they want you to see. That's what Google got fined for. So I think we have to really start thinking more outside the usual boxes if we're going to really get these companies to respond in a positive way.
So what would be this thinking about, let's say, out of usual boxes?
Well, I mean, just like we require licenses and permits for Ford Motor Company, we need to have a digital license, digital permits, that these companies have to, in order to operate here in Germany, in order to beam into Germany, they should be required to agree to certain digital licenses and permits, just like Ford Motor Company. I mean, in some ways, the way to treat the new companies is just like we treated the old companies. It's just that we have to find new ways to do that. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, if you really want to think through this as a thought experiment, it might mean that you have to figure out a way to, what if, you know, Google or Facebook says, well, forget your digital license, no, I don't agree to it. What do you do then? Well, the only country that's really dealt with this effectively is China. And they shut them out. And technology exists to shut these companies down. Now, China did it for reasons of political censorship, repression, to some degree economic nationalism. But democracies can do it for different reasons, for better reasons, because it upholds our values, and these companies are not agreeing to follow any laws. And when Uber just comes in and breaks every law that you have in your taxi you know, industry, you can either let them or you can stop them. At a certain point, it gets down to something that black and white.
What do you think about this idea, Sabina? And
I think first we could regulate, but the big problem is, first, on one thing, we have to find regulations that work globally. And that's not easy to come to, as we know. But the main problem is, as long as we have politicians who are for years now intentionally passing laws that are in the logic of deregulation of the labor market, of minimizing voice of employees. This is all, I mean, everything we see as outsourcing, offshoring, all those phenomena that came before the platform economy are all the result of pretty much intentional lawmaking. So if you want to put that into another direction, this is really a big political change where I'm not that hopeful we have the momentum or will be able to create it in the next time. But I think without it, we won't change anything about that, because we have, at least in Germany, we have a political mainstream that the moment thinks everything that's new and has something to do with disruption, innovation, Silicon Valley, and so on, shouldn't be regulated at all, because this is somehow especially innovative if you don't regulate. And somehow the old economy, although they are somehow also the victim of the development, just have the old reflex of regulation is always bad for us as a company, so we try to put it down. And we have really to get into a discussion about how could we regulate market logic if it's going to, if it's out of the box in means of it hurts people, it hurts voice, it hurts democracy, it hurts society and its needs as a whole. We have to start about talking about that. It's really about for what is economy there. And I think let's really a big question where I don't know how we get into a real discussion about what we want to make economy, how we want to design societies. I'm not so sure if it helps at the moment if we are going too much into detail about how could on a special platform, microtask platform, which kind of regulation do we need? I mean, we need that too, but it shouldn't distract us about the big developments which need the political intention to say, we as government see our job as if there are things that develop that hurt people or make them more insecure, it's our job to find ideas how to get it along again. And as long as we don't have this kind of thinking in the mainstream of our political deciders, I'm not so hopeful, but I think we have to think about those questions.
Do you think President Macron has sort of made an offer to Germany to start, he's got a plan for artificial intelligence and all these sorts of things, and do you think Germany is going to...
But he's pretty much deregulating the French labor market too. I mean, I don't think he's a politician that stands for regulation in the sense of we are talking about. I'm not so sure. I don't see it. Maybe I'm...
Six, you just mentioned just pass a law. So how about which kind of law? And wouldn't we need this kind of great firewall just to enforce it?
I don't think so. And I was having that thought a couple years ago when I first came here. Like, yeah, these companies are untouchable, right? Because internet, right? And in the last few years, I've noticed a couple things, and especially since November of 2016, I think there's regrettably, for regrettable reasons, in Silicon Valley an opening, because the people building these technologies have realized what they've done politically and how these technologies, if left unregulated, can undermine democracy. And I think that's been a bit of a wake-up call because most people in Silicon Valley are left-leaning, and they realize that the platforms that they created and maintained and operated, and specifically the business models that they're using, have led to something that they didn't expect and didn't want. And so I think they're having a moment of psychological growth. And I think that's important, right? Because there's, you know, the sort of left economist Yanis Varoufakis has a very critical book about the European financial establishment called Adults in the Room. And I think that there's a really good point behind that title. The science fiction writer William Gibson said something as well 18 years ago about, you know, the future was coming and it was going to be planned because there was going to be grown-ups making decisions. There are no grown-ups. There are no grown-ups. Nobody has a fucking clue. Nobody has a clue, right? The politicians don't understand the technology. The technologists don't understand the economics. The economists don't understand people. We have a big problem, right? So I'll come back for a minute. Something that I think is going to be an interesting European regulatory experiment. I have read the English version of the text of the General Data Protection Regulation. The first 30 pages it's the same thing being said over and over and over again, and then there's some stuff. And it's really interesting regulation to me because it says European data subjects have rights that are inalienable and apply no matter where the data processing is, no matter where the legal location of the company doing the data processing is. These are inalienable rights of European data subjects. And European data subjects are people anywhere in Europe. They don't even have to be citizens of EU member states. And I was reading this like, this is going to be interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine who is extremely critical. She works very closely with both commercial and non-for-profit content moderators and has consulted for a lot of the Silicon Valley companies and is sort of known among their middle management for being somebody that you want to hire as a consultant, but who you should be afraid of because she is not going to pull any of her punches. She's going to tell you all the things that your boss doesn't want to hear. About how you're failing to protect people on your platform from harassment and how your violence filters suck and all of this stuff. And she told me recently, I realized something, which is that what happens in Brussels is important because it's too expensive and annoying for the platform operators to have two versions of their platform. So if Europe creates rules and the management of a particular platform believes that there's no way they're going to get away from following these rules, those rules will probably apply for all users of a platform, even if they're in shithole countries like mine. So, pass a law. Pass a law, guys.
Okay.
Can I say just one thing about
Yeah, of course.
the General Data Protection Plan? I was reading an interesting article called The 5 Loopholes in the General Data Protection Plan. And I'll just, the one that struck out to me the most was that this part about even if another country is covered by this, is that the technical language they have is that the companies are making an offering and not that they're making a sale. And so, and there's a lot of interpretations of what an offering is, because an offering happens prior to the sale. And so what this author was saying, what they'll be able to do is set up a third company. So when you click on that link to buy, so they made the offer, now you're clicking on the link to buy, it's going to go to another website, and you won't even know it's going to another website in Malaysia. And that's where the buying will happen. And because it's separate from the offering, it won't be covered. So it's going to be interesting to see how these rules actually play out. I think there's going to be a lot of lawsuits. Lawsuits take a long time. So it could really take 5 or 6 years before we really know the full impact of the GDPR. Everybody's hopeful that it's going to make a difference, and I think it will, but we just don't know how much yet.
I would like to open the discussion to the audience. So are there questions, comments? So I see, Frank, you start.
Does it work? Yeah. Comment in the sense that historically we have a polarized labor market in all industrialized countries. That is, we have the basic division between employees and self-employed. Mm-hmm. And I guess in that perspective, what we have now is that this polarization breaks down. We have that middle category of formally freelance workers who aren't really free because they have no market position to use their means of production to really act independently. And my question simply is, don't we need some kind of institutionalized regulation, some laws that will regulate this third category more properly? I don't know. The US situation, of course, is that you also have little regulation on employed work, so there's a little in between, maybe. But I don't know if the only way to get things handled is to get hold of the companies and get them to agree to voluntarily cooperate to set up certain standards, and that doesn't mean that I don't think that you're doing great work there at the IG Metall for the moment, because it's really necessary, but I don't think that it's enough that can be done. And of course, the data protection laws, problem will be to enforce them. How can you enforce it? Not at all, probably.
Maybe we take the second comment and then go back to the panel.
Thank you. It's not so much a comment, it's a question. I'm Philipp Stender from Jacques Delors Institute. It's a EU think tank here in Berlin. And my question would be on representation and organization of the workers. So one thing that all of you described was that solo self-employment replaces regular employment, which means that these people are probably not in labor unions anymore. So my first question would be, how can unions become attractive again for platform workers? Are there any ways? And the second question would be, if you have many self-employed people compared to traditional self-employed people who organize themselves in associations to set standards and things like that, do you see possibilities for self-employed people in the gig to also organize themselves and protect themselves to set standards? Thank you.
I don't believe in voluntary goodwill from companies. I mean, I think you can get some companies to do it, but I think you need laws and regulations. And the conversation in the U.S. is they're talking about, you have what's called W-2 workers, then you have 1099 workers, the freelancers. They want to create a third category, dependent contractors instead of independent contractors. That's just going to create more jobs for lawyers. I mean, the lawyers just try to figure out what category you're in, and you try to stop, you somehow try to argue they're not in this category because of X, Y, and Z. Oh, they wear uniforms, so they must be a worker, all these sorts of things. It's just a silly game of chasing the tail. That's why I like the portable safety net idea. There's no categories anymore. Everybody is covered. What we've done in the post-World War II economy is we've created good jobs and we've created crummy jobs. And we've given incentive for employers to get as many of their workers in the crummy job category because they're saving 25, 30% on their labor costs. And we've created the incentives in the economy to do these terrible things. So, when we first started out with temp workers and permatemps and this kind of thing, there weren't that many of them. I mean, in the US, temp workers started out, these temp agencies, they only hired women in the 1950s, Kelly Girls and all these sorts of things. And the arguments they used was, oh, it's just hiring women. Don't worry about that. It's just a few women. That's, And so that was the camel's nose under the tent. And then, they expanded that over the 60s and over the 70s, and suddenly you had these big, huge temp agencies. That was the beginning of fracturing, fissuring, as it's been called in the US, the labor market. And we've been playing catch up ever since. To me, the way to stop it all right now is just create this portable safety net. It's going to do a lot of things. As I said, it's going to give flexibility and security for workers. It's going to get rid of the incentives in the economy of hiring these low-wage or these workers that don't get any safety net. Everybody's covered, no exceptions. That to me is the way to do it, and getting past this game that we're in with lawyers and all these kind of things. So I'll just let other people answer. I have other thoughts on your question.
You want to comment on the organizing of platform workers?
I have a question for Stephen first.
Yep.
Do you think they should get minimum wage too?
That who should get minimum wage?
That self-employed persons. Does your portable safety net include a minimum wage?
It doesn't include minimum wage, no.
Should it?
I'm open to that discussion, but in the U.S. we actually have gotten some traction. President Obama endorsed the idea. Senator Mark Warner has endorsed the idea. We've gotten some companies to endorse this idea. So there's actually, it may not seem like it, but there's actually some live conversations about that. So we're trying to have a viable proposal that actually can get some traction. But I mean, then there's been some versions of this, but it's been proposed in the New York State Legislature where the amount that workers would get would be nothing. And so, you know, the businesses are already trying to water down this idea. So if we put too much into it, some people wanted to put childcare into it, you know, let that all be covered. And so we just tried to focus on the usual things that we think of when you talk about safety nets, so Social Security, you know, retirement, health care, Medicare, injured worker compensation, unemployment. I mean, a huge number of workers in the United States get injured and have nothing. So, you know, these freelancers especially have nothing if they get injured. They have to pay for their own health care, and they have to pay for themselves while they're injured. So we're trying to just get a basic proposal like this and see if we can get some traction. But I think it's a good idea to, I mean, you know, minimum wages.
Still, the question on organizing platform work.
Yeah, so we're giving it a shot. I think in terms of organizing, there's an important distinction to be made between workers that are doing location-based work, right? So food delivery, driving, cleaning, this kind of stuff. And workers who are doing work that's delivered online. Because if you're a trade union and you're deciding to, okay, so for example, NGG has a collective agreement with Foodora in Cologne, and they have they have a works council in Cologne. There's a Foodora works council in Vienna. There's the Freie Arbeitnehmerinnen und Arbeitnehmer Union is here is organizing Deliveroo and Foodora workers. Uber drivers has been organizing with trade unions all over the world for years. You can go out onto the street and talk to these people, and once they understand what a trade union is, because a lot of them have no exposure to trade unions, a lot of them don't know their rights. Sometimes these people are coming from other countries. They don't speak the language. They've never heard what a works council is. You know, they're just happy to be getting some money. Once you talk to them about what their rights are, they're pretty interested. So I think that the trade unions in general have a lot of work to do to understand the concerns and experiences and sort of situations of these people and develop communication strategies for explaining to them what trade unions are, how they can get involved, and develop structures and bring, right? It's just organizing work. It takes time. It's annoying. You know, if these people don't speak German and you're a German trade union, your first task is like, oh, I have to find somebody who speaks whatever language, right? And they also have to speak German. It's just annoying organizational work, and it takes time and money. But it's happening. The online workers, it's even more annoying because how do you find them, right? So we have methods for doing that. It's time consuming and expensive and annoying. And in some cases, did I mention how annoying this is? And in some cases, it requires cooperation from the platform operators because it's a completely surveilled, where you have no chance to communicate with somebody over a platform except for through the platform. You know, with the exception of a few platforms that have Facebook groups and stuff like that. But mostly, that's very limited. So I think the short answer is the same thing that trade unions have always done in the sort of very abstract, in the sense of the same spirit of things that they've already done, which is talk to people, understand what their problems are, be a human, and, you know, develop organizational and political strategies. And, you know, we have some crowd work, like remote work crowd worker members who have joined IG Metall because they're like, oh yeah, you guys are doing reasonable things. I will join the trade union. There are Deliveroo and Foodora drivers that have joined their relevant trade unions because those trade unions have developed activities that those people see as being relevant and as improving their situation. But it's still very early days. Does that sort of answer your question?
Maybe halfway.
Okay, what was the second half?
I would be more interested in how workers could also negotiate. I mean, they can't negotiate their wages, at least not collectively. And I think since they are self-employed, kind of self-eating.
So the legal issue.
But yeah, that would be one thing. I think self-employment is not really self-employed. And the other is the question, how do you feel in a more, from a more societal perspective, with the replacement of regular employment, which has collective wage agreements, being replaced by self-employed people. And I think that's the big.
So I'll try to answer that really shortly. The first part, we are pushing for and have been pushing for now 2 years. Our official position, I can say this completely happily, is that platform workers, even if they're legally self-employed and actually self-employed, not falsely self-employed, so falsely self-employed people should be reclassified, and then they have all the rights. Even real self-employed workers who are working on the platforms, we believe should be able to organize and negotiate collective agreements with the platform operator. The difficult part is that the platform operators, when they're really marketplace operators, so I think Uber is a firm pretending to be a marketplace. Upwork is really a marketplace, right? Upwork actually has limited power over the wages. They have power, they can influence it, but they're not like Uber setting prices directly. So you need another mechanism. Eventually what you need to do is get at the clients. So we're trying to develop a strategy now where we're trying, it's very, very early, but we actually want to organize the clients as a sort of, they will then commit to paying at least minimum wage in the worker's location, even if it's, right? So if you have a pool of 100 workers doing something, and you have some workers in Bangladesh and some workers in Austria, is that actually politically acceptable? It's a separate question. But I think my short answer to that is like, to actually improve wages for solo self-employed workers, you need to communicate with the clients and say, look, if your logic is like, well, I want this for €2 an hour and I want somebody with a German education who's living in Germany who can speak fluent German, like, you're shooting yourself in the foot in the long term because you're eroding the labor pool of people who are actually financially able to provide the work that you need. So it's a communication strategy. It's going to be sort of like a consumer marketing approach, but I don't, the longer term societal question, defer to my colleagues.
Well, Six, you mentioned passing laws. What if we passed a law saying these companies have to give us the data of who works for them?
Yeah, I think we should do
Then
that.
you can find them.
Yeah, I think we should do that.
I mean, that's a law we need to pass. I mentioned earlier, data in so many ways is becoming so important. Not only our personal data, but who works for whom. Who needs to be paying taxes? I mean, Airbnb, you know, the city of Berlin passed a law to crack down on Airbnb, okay? And the law they passed, and went in place in May of 2016, was so that it was trying to allow people to rent out a spare room in their home. It was trying to crack down on the professionals that rent out entire apartments. So they said you could only rent out a certain percentage of your apartment. You had to register, all these sorts of things. A year later, the number of people renting out whole homes on their apartments in Airbnb had gone up by 46% after this law was in place. Because you don't know what percentage they're I mean, how are you supposed to know who's even doing it? How many nights they're doing it? How much they're charging per night so you know how much to tax them? Hotels pay taxes in this city. Airbnb doesn't. And if you don't have the data from this company, you cannot regulate it.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me that the light bulb is not going on these things. You need the data for Upwork, for Airbnb, for all these platform companies to regulate them, to be able to contact their employees. If you don't have the data, they will run circles around you, and they are. That's what is happening. That's true. And that's not just Berlin, it's happening in every city.
We have another question.
Maybe just a small one. Why is it not Schwarzarbeit when I work on a platform? Or a black market, like black work?
You mean if it's simply illegal?
Yeah, because when I get somebody cleaning my house without registering it, it's Schwarzarbeit. And so what's like the difference between Schwarzarbeit and working on Upwork?
You mean if...
Because there's a German institution who is aiming for finding people who do Schwarzarbeit,
Yeah.
and then you have to pay a fine because you have somebody cleaning your room without you paying taxes. And that's my question, why is the Zoll, like the institution, having to find people doing Schwarzarbeit, not aiming for people working on a platform? Because there's a new platform where you can find like a cleaning woman. And if I would be the Zoll, I would want to have the data of this platform, because then I most likely know there's a lot of Schwarzarbeit going on, you know. But
our research with this crowd worker doing microtask mostly in this case, there were some who are unemployed and get unemployment compensation, Hartz IV. And of course, they don't want that the data comes to the state, of course, because for them it's a really important part of their income, and if they have to make it open, their unemployment compensation will be low. So even this is also a problem, that we have some people who, of course, as people don't want to have the data open. So any kind of regulation that goes into that has to see that maybe there are some people who are forced out of this kind of compensation. But of course you can find regulation ideas for that too if you want to. It's not, but we asked them in the research what they think about that. And of course they are cautious.
Say people don't want the government to have their data, or letting Facebook take all their data and do whatever it wants.
But I think the answer to that question is that the German platform operators, at least, report all of their transactions to the Finanzamt. So the government has the data. What they do with it, that's another question.
There are more questions or comments. 1, 2, 3. So maybe we collect this all three and then respond. I don't know. So who was first? I don't know.
Thank you. Yeah, my question would also be, I guess, to Six Silverman. So you were talking about the code of conduct, and so my simple question is, why do you think those platforms are actually interested in kind of doing this code of conduct and organizing it kind of as employers or as platforms? And my hypothesis would be that those platforms, they won't really succeed in the long run in Germany because of the German kind of labor market and system, and that they try to create a niche by organizing as platforms, and yeah, then also being in touch with the unions, of course. So basically my question is, why do you think are they doing this? And then the second question, how would you compare the platforms kind of embedded in the political economy of US and Germany and the kind of long-term, I don't know, survival chance or something of the platforms? I don't know, I hope that was clear, the question.
Yeah.
So
should I answer that or wait?
Or let's collect maybe 3 and then
I write down.
I don't know.
Yeah, my first question was actually asked by Christina, so I wouldn't repeat it. But I have a short comment. So I'm doing my research on content moderation for social media platforms, and in my research, I've of course understood until now that there is the possibility of crowd work, but there's also platforms that are working together with third-party companies, you know. So my focus is on India, but not just India, but there's also other places where platforms such as Facebook and other companies would work with these third-party companies who already have the regulation, who already have the digital licenses or those sort of things that you would call for. So I wonder if this is just a question of political, you know, interest, the domestic political interest or the international political interest, or how to sort of safeguard these sort of global value chains in assembly line. And if one could, any of you could make a short comment on this. Yeah.
Maybe we take the third one.
Yeah, I have to confess, I'm a consultant in the gig economy. So my experience over the last 5 or 6 years has been that I get involved in quite large long-term projects, typically with 3 or 4 other people, and things I do are like digital transformation projects. But the reason why large companies are giving us these projects is because they don't have the specialist people working for them. I tend to work with people who are ultra-specialized. I classify myself as someone that's ultra-specialized. We ask these companies, well, why are you giving us this, not only to plan the strategy, but also to do the execution? And these projects last 3, sometimes 3, 4 years. And they say, we don't know how to do it. We don't have the skills. So that they're outsourcing stuff that they know that they can only get from outside. Would you agree with my one-dimensional analysis?
Would I agree with
Well,
what?
would you, have you observed
got
that sort of behavior with companies saying, well, we're outsourcing jobs simply because we don't have these types of specialists within our own organization?
Yeah, I mean, if it works for the company, works for you, then do it. But I just think you should be properly compensated, and you should have, you know, the type of safety net that people need.
How much an hour do you charge?
Want an honest answer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. How much an hour? Numbers.
In Europe, 150.
Yeah, so the kind of people that are working on like Deliveroo, Fedora, ClickWorker, we're talking like 4 to 10.
I know.
So you're at the other end of the labor market. Like, we're not worried about you.
No, but I still think you should at least have, you know, the ability to have a safety net and these sorts of things. I mean, regardless of the worker and how much they're making. But yeah, I mean, this, as Six is saying, there's a lot of other workers working similarly freelance like you are. And I mean, Stanford University just came out with a study and said that ride-sharing drivers are making, after you account for their costs, they're making less than $10 an hour in the United States on average, and that half of ride-sharing drivers make less than the minimum wage in their state. So, you know, and the thing is that they don't even know it. You know, a lot of these drivers, they're the CEO of their own driving business. And I got a ride from one the other day. It's a German company called Blacklane. They do limo companies, and for various reasons I was in this car. And but anyway, I asked this driver. I mean, limo companies are different. They're not trying to flood the streets with cars and be a taxi company. They have a whole high-end clientele. But I asked this driver, "Did you ever drive for Uber?" And he said, "What?"
High-end.
High-end?
You're a high-end client.
Yeah. Someone else was paying for it. I was going to a talk. Okay, and he said that he was going to drive Uber Black, which is the limo service. So he and his wife, you know, pooled their money and they bought a Mercedes. They bought a gray Mercedes. And he said, and Uber said, it's got to be black. And I said, well, what did you do then? And he said, we had to drive my Mercedes at regular Uber rates. And, you know, and it was costing me so much in gas and repairs, I was losing money. So, I mean, this is the CEO of his own driving business. He bought a gray car instead of a black car. And, you know, a lot of these drivers don't know how much they're making. They don't know how much their expenses are. When you ask them, are you amortizing the wear and tear of your car over the life of the car? They say no. There's no skill building out there at all. They're just driving their car and hoping to make some money. And it turns out a lot of them are not. This is the reality of the ride-sharing business.
I want to answer the two earlier questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Unless. Marketing. Good marketing is the answer to, like, there's been really unfavorable journalistic coverage of crowdsourcing in Germany, and like they want to improve their image and they want to get these big companies that are staying away from crowdsourcing because of all the bad reportage to like believe that they're trustworthy, and like I think some of them are. You know, there are some companies that say like, we shoot for our workers to get €10 an hour, and they claim that, you know, they have a distribution of around like 8 to 12 an hour for most of their tasks. I haven't seen the individual per task per worker data, but I believe them. And so one of their arguments is like, there's a huge range of how responsible platforms are with respect to their workers. And like, we're trying to do better, and this is how we're trying. So it's marketing, but I don't mean that in a completely cynical way. But I think it's fair to say that it's mainly about marketing, because they want to survive. Long-term survival chances, I think it's totally mixed by industry. I think you have some, and I think the microtask platform operators will say this totally openly. One of their competitors is the artificial intelligence systems that they are themselves training. That being said, there's a huge wave, there's a huge flood of new work in the last 12 months to, it's all image and video stuff, and it's basically they're training the AI systems that are driving autonomous cars. So some of these companies, they were like, we don't know if we're going to exist in 5 years. And like in the last 12 months, like, oh, this is great. This autonomous car stuff, this is awesome. Like we're set now, at least for the next, 5 or 10 years until the cars can really drive themselves, which like they can't. So it's totally different. It depends on the industry. Like there's these text marketplaces. There's a German one that specializes in German language stuff. And then there's other ones that are totally international. Well, guess what? The wages are a lot higher on the German language task because there's a smaller pool of workers that can provide that work. They're also competing with artificial intelligence, but that's harder. So yeah, there's going to be change in the industry, but I don't think it's going away. Part of the answer to I don't think it's going away is that like a huge amount of anything that you see being marketed as AI is either being trained by people or it's actually just being operated by people. Like, so that's kind of nice for the platform operators and for some of the workers. Did that sort of answer your question? Like, it's not a good answer, but the actual answer is like 10 pages long and it has charts and stuff. I did not understand your question. It was more of a comment. Okay, great. Oh, right, so the fact that like, oh, it's not called Crowdflower anymore, it's called Figure 8 now. But Crowdflower, which is, they changed their name for good reasons. The blog post is super interesting, super interesting. Yeah. So like they said a year or so ago that 15% of the tasks that are posted on that platform are just outsourced to a BPO in India called iMerit. It's just a traditional, there's no, and this was this is not completely true, but at some point you're kind of like, well, there's no crowd. They just outsource it to a company that has offices, and the people show up at 9 o'clock, and they go home at 5 o'clock, and there's computers sitting there, and they have fixed employment contracts, and they get paid a local salary. And that was, when I learned that was kind of funny. So yeah, it's just kind of this like obfuscation layer between the, rich country client and a BPO. That's interesting. You're making a confused face. I don't know if I'm answering or even making a relevant comment. But we can talk more later if you want. Sorry if that's unsatisfying.
So we are approaching nearly the end of our time, but I saw there was one more question. So we can take 1 or 2 questions if there's somebody else. Yeah. So there's a second question for the 2 last.
Okay, just starting with the question, I mean, we try to find ways to regulate these companies, the platforms. And I mean, the first issue that was raised by Sabine Pfeiffer is, of course, the question of financialization of these business models, and also, of course, the other side of their business models, tax evasion or tax optimization. So I think the regulation is firstly on the tax base. And I see so many talks on this issue, and nobody talks about the tax issues. So we all know that we have like intercompany contracts that we transfer the profits from Germany to Ireland, for example, we transfer it back to the Dutch, and then we have this double Irish-Dutch thing where we end up with nearly zero tax. So it's quite clear, let's say, for a big part, that the first step of regulation is tax regulation in a common sense, because these platforms are destroying our social systems, and these platforms are damaging, let's say, not also the employees there. So that would be the first step when we talk about tax regulation. And the second step you were mentioning was the question of regulating labor law. So I mean, the proposal that came up that I realized was a little bit the German co-determination concept, that it is based on the establishment concept, Betriebsbegriff in Germany. So that is one issue. So we need to expand the establishment concept, to expand it also on this kind of platforms. Then we can have forms of co-determination also on platforms, because of course the second part of the labor regulation would be the question dealing with the question of false labor contract or false self-employment. And I mean, we have in the German Civil Code since 2017 a definition of a labor contract that is described in the sense of dependent work, seeing as being not able to determine by themselves their work content and the way they have to perform work, or the time how they perform it. So we have quite clear in many cases, Uber, etc., where it's determined how you need to fulfill your work. So we are quite clear in the field of labor contracts. We are talking with employees. So the only question that comes in there is, that the false self-employment is the individual labor law area. So that means you as a false self-employed need to go to court to claim your money, to claim that you are an employee in the real term. And that is just on the single side. And I mean, there comes the third step of regulation that the man from the IG Metall was mentioning. You were talking about terms and conditions. We have in Germany AGB Gesetz, and it is quite clear that most American platforms are totally not following the German AGB Gesetz. And I think we also need regulation on that front. And I would like to say, to ask you, do you have clear concepts in these fields where you would say you contribute in that direction of regulating it in a detail level?
Yes.
Let's take the second question just for a final round, because the first one was already very complex. So
I'll try to keep it very short then. My question or my comment also relates to what the previous speaker was referring about taxation. So I wanted to broaden it a bit, the regulation question. And I was wondering if we make this comparison with Fordist car workers and the gig economy, if that's a fair comparison, or whether when we look at regulation, we need to look at firms like Apple or Starbucks who are using offshore tax havens and complex forms, and we know they make profits in the places where they sell the coffee, but somehow they declare massive losses and get away with it. So I think in the same sense, it's like we know where people are working, where people are cleaning homes, so aren't we able to do something with that data and then hold firms accountable to that in a way? The second remark I wanted to make is more about the narratives and the narratives of these kinds of the kind of economy we're talking about and the actors within it. Because are these firms we're talking about, I heard a lot of people talk about firms, are these employees or are they freelancers? And what kind of new terms do we maybe need to find when we talk about these actors and their role in the economy in order not to reinforce some of the problems that exist in this new field? So my question is, and to what extent are we obfuscating or blurring, or is there a blurring of boundaries occurring that we also need to be aware of and to work with in order to be able to arrive at more meaningful options for regulations and new ideas for that?
okay, so let's have a final round of answers. I know Sabine, Six, and Steven.
I can't answer any legal stuff like Adrian asked for, but I want again maybe look into the question of global value chains and the question about what are we looking to, because I mean we have all those former developments like contract manufacturing, for example, global value change in the textile industry. I mean, we all know if I'm able to buy a coat in Germany that costs 3 marks, euros, you can search on Amazon, you find a coat, a new coat for 3 euros. And it's not important that you find it on Amazon. You can also go into shops in Germany and get things to buy for just some euros. And we all know that the work conditions somewhere else on this planet have to be beyond anything to make it able to that I buy a coat here for 3 euros. And all those things is not happening as some kind of unintended consequence of things that somebody didn't look for. So it's all the consequence of intentional lawmaking, and I think we have really put the point to that, because all those tax things that are going on, the possibility that I can just relabel things that are somewhere produced as they are produced there, and we had a lecturing at my old university where somebody was applying for a chair in economics. And the talk the person gave, who was with one of the big consulting companies for years, formerly, was how do I explain to my students how can I get all those loopholes in those tax regulations? And she really made pretty clear how the international lawmakers everywhere, what they did in the last years, over 10, 15 years, to open up all those loopholes systematically. So it's not, I think we often talk about all this stuff like something is happening and it's new and we have now to look at can we react with regulations. But we have to put into point of view that we have so much consequences that are intentional consequences because of lawmaking that want those differences, that want lesser voice on the employee side. Because if we don't take this into account too, we can really start to think and discuss in societies about how can we change it really. So I don't know how to do that, but I think we should not too often just look on the new things that are happening because they are just in the logic of something bigger on development that we can observe in the last years. It's no answer, but a comment.
I try to answer point by point quickly and then pass to Stephen. The tax stuff, I don't know anything about tax stuff. So you will have to be happy with what she just said. Betriebsverfassungsgesetz, Erweiterung, expansion of the definition of a Betrieb. So I've had the word Plattformverfassungsgesetz written in my notebook several times for the last few years. I don't know if we're going to get one. I don't know if there's going to be an expansion of the definition of a Betrieb, but it's something that people are talking about. It's a great idea. It's something that we've talked about with some of the platforms, and they're like, yeah, sure, we just have to make sure that it makes sense, and you guys will have to help us to organize a works council because we have no expertise in doing that. But they're open to it. I don't think there would be some huge resistance from the German platforms, at least. How would it apply internationally? I have no clue. But yeah, it's possible, it's thinkable. It will take, of course, 5 years minimum, but it could happen. The employee status. I don't know if I got your question exactly, but this might be relevant to what you said. There's a EU guideline for platforms being proposed, and the core of that is basically that there should be a rebuttable assumption of an employment relationship, of a normal employment relationship between platform workers and the platforms. I think this will help workers on platforms for local services like TaskRabbit and the driving platforms, Deliveroo, stuff like that. I don't think it's actually going to help workers on online platforms that much because the platform operators will be able to prove that it's not an employment relationship, I think, because in my estimation, it's not. Whereas I think for the delivery stuff, Deliveroo, I think is false self-employment. But I think it's still really important. So I think maybe that's relevant. AGB Gesetz, we have a huge, well not huge, but we have, 20 pages of proposals for how to regulate that. But I did not know there was an AGB Gesetz because I don't know anything about German law except for what I've learned in the last 3 years. So thank you, I'm gonna look that up and maybe I will try to take the suggestions that we have and think about talking to the lawyers who actually know anything about this and saying, could we develop this as a proposal for changes to the AGB Gesetz? So thank you very much. I'm done.
Well, when you look at what's happening in the United States right now, and has been happening for a number of years, even under Barack Obama to some degree, it's very worrisome because you're basically seeing the post-World War II employer-employee relationship being shredded in a lot of ways. And that insecurity led to Donald Trump in many ways. Mm-hmm. Didn't help that Hillary Clinton wasn't a great candidate for lots of reasons, but so the response I've been hearing in Germany is well, we're not like that. But you can see similar trends here in Germany and in Europe as well. And it seems to me that you don't need to wait until things are in crisis before you start making changes that seems to me are pretty clearly needed. We can see the direction that these platform companies are going. We can see what the you know, how they're trying to de-link the employer-employee relationship. And we can see ways to counteract that. Things like portable safety nets, like you know, profit sharing, for example, forming more co-ops, having more job sharing, using laws and regulations to craft the labor markets and craft the society that we want. I really think that that's the challenge here. I mean, in terms of tax laws and things like this, the tax havens that have been going on, yeah, it's disgraceful. It's a shame. And it's been going on before platform companies. Well, that's, you know, a change of law is what's needed. And so it seems to me that, I mean, we've thrown out a lot of ideas here about what can be done, but to me, you know, having companies that basically exist everywhere and nowhere, don't have to follow any laws, you know, that basically feel like they're not beholden to anywhere. They can pay their taxes where they want. This is not this doesn't bode well for the future. And so, you know, having things like digital licenses, digital borders, having portable safety nets, getting control of the data. Data is the currency of the digital age. Some have compared it to the new oil of the digital age. Whatever metaphor you want, data is becoming incredibly important. Whoever controls data will control so many other things. So we need to have laws, the general data protection regulations, to start. At least you can see that, you know, that mentality is there, trying to figure out something. The European Competition Commissioner has tried to crack down on abuses of some of these companies. The German Facebook law, to me, is another attempt. It's somewhat a clumsy attempt, but it is an attempt to try and figure out how we're going to regulate these companies differently. And I think that we're at the beginning of this. We're just at the beginning of it. So we, you know, all of you are researchers and everything. We have to start researching this, but we need to put proposals on the table and start debating these proposals. And I don't think it's going to come from Silicon Valley. I hate to tell you. I mean, I know that, you know, Germany and Europe in general have sort of been used to the U.S. sitting up front driving, and you guys could be in the back seat, and as long as we didn't drive it over the cliff, everything was good. You know, well, we're about to drive it over the cliff, in case you didn't notice. So I really think that here is where it's going to have to happen. And it's not going to happen in China. It's not going to happen in the US. It's going to have to be here. The final thing I'll just say is that my publisher donated 10 copies of this. This book is in German, and it's about German labor markets, comparing it to US labor markets, comparing Silicon Valley to the startup community here. And there's a number of proposals in here that I make for Germany, including portable safety net, partial retirement, and number of other things having to do with co-ops, and also Rocket Mittelstand. Get your head around that. Rocket Internet combined with the Mittelstand. Because the Mittelstand really is, to me, as an American, when I look at the German economy, the Mittelstand is what's really amazing in Germany. It's about 60% of your jobs, about 55% of your exports, and it needs to get into the digital age. And, you know, there's a lot of discussion about that, but not much is really happening as far as I can tell. So I write about all that in the book, and if anyone wants a free copy, we have them here. Thank you to Martin and to everybody.
I have to thank you all. Thank you very much, Sabine, Six, Stephen. You're all invited, let's say, before we drive over the cliff, or maybe while we drive over it, just to take a drink in the lobby. Maybe then the fall will be smoother, or I don't know, or hurt less, exactly. So you're invited to have some wine. You can talk to Stephen, to Six, to Sabine, and so the book copies are here, Stephen, and go ahead. And yeah, thank you very much for taking part in the discussion.